Nasaria is a very special individual. I grew up with her in terms of her and John Gray as a drama teacher, but we all know her as a fantastic artist. She's a storyteller and a poet. She represented the Cayman Islands in the Poetry Olympics, ladies and gentlemen, in 2012. And she also, for those of you who are not aware of this, in terms of her art, won the National Gallery Biennial in 2019. And then if you weren't paying attention just last week and saw her in the newspaper and on social media, as she was awarded the Cayman National Cultural Foundation Gold Star for creativity. So you agree with me, we have royalty in our midst. So ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure that I'd like to introduce to you Mrs. Nasaria Suckoo as she presents to us on African influence on Cayman culture, and then she'll be joined by her husband, Randy. Nasaria.
Please let me know if you have any difficulty hearing me. It's amazing to look across the room and see all these faces of family and friends and even new friends that I shall soon meet. And thank you for coming out. I felt that this was an important thing to do tonight because I watch young people all the time just wondering about not kind of knowing who they are, having no sense of what they're coming from and where they're going. And I've included these types of information in my teaching and those types of things, but now we want to take it to a bigger platform to make sure that we are doing our part to keep the culture strong and rich and to pass it on so it doesn't just die away. Be patient with me with this technology. I'm gonna try a click. There we go. All right. I just wanted to say thanks to my husband, Randy for doing the drumming. And originally, Abigail was going to be helping me with the technology, but she is my art assistant, just right over here. She actually comes and helps me do a lot of the preparation for artwork. So I've gotten to that point now where I can afford a little helper every now and then. So thankful. I have to give this disclaimer because I wanted everyone to understand I am not an expert in African history and culture. What I'm presenting to you tonight is information I have come across over the years when preparing for either writing, creating text for exhibitions at the museum, or creating art. And it's quite shocking to me when I start to do that, those checks, and I'm doing research, and then something jumps out at me, and I was like, there is that connection. A lot of you may not know, but I went to Howard University. I first went to a college in Tampa. When I first got to Howard University, I mean, it's just a whole different world. You've got people of color from every walk of life. You got the girls, I don't remember all the Greek names, but you got the ones with the afro and they don't shave and they, Black power. And then you have the girls with the creamed hair and the suits and everything. It was amazing. I thought I had like won a ticket to heaven or something. And so it was that started to help me to understand some of the things I had. That experience helped me to understand some of the experiences I'd had in Cayman when I was younger. I just didn't know what to call it at that time. So moving on, why is it important that we recognize the African influence on Caymanian culture? First of all, to eradicate the lie, no slavery in Cayman. And it's really important for us to understand that I sat in a classroom at John Gray High School, which was then called Cayman Islands High School. And I remember being told by my teacher that there was no slavery here. And if there had been, it wasn't anything bad that happened because we didn't have that much violence. And so it was, just sort of like a Band-Aid on top of it. And I remember sitting there thinking, what if I were playing on 7 Mile Beach and a boat came in and grabbed me and took me away to a place where nobody spoke the language that I spoke, and I never got to see my family again? I don't really care how you treat me, what you've done in the initial thing of taking me, which is kidnapping, is something that's, how do you get over that, right? And so I think it's important that we really look at our society. We can't go forward without knowing and acknowledging that this exists, and therefore then be able to recognize everything we got through that system. Sorry, I need to go back. I decided to put the artwork in because I included in my title that I wanted to explain how this relates in my work. I always am influenced by the evidence of Africa that I have encountered, and just that there's something about this feeling, this thing about colors that nobody else said could ever go together, that just manages to look amazing. And I get it from both sides of my culture, which is Africa and India. And so you'll find that my work includes a lot of that. But this piece, Maiden Plum, I did in 2006. And this Maiden Plum is something that if you rub it wrong, you're gonna get burned. And I equate that to the women in Cayman. We've had to, when the men are away at sea, women have had to do just about everything. And so therefore we have learned to be quite strong-willed. And it's quite a formidable task. You come up against a Caymanian woman who's decided that what you want is not what she wants. And so that image for me was, that feeling about women and the women that I grew up with is what I put into this work. And that fish on the breast is a hogfish. And so it's representative of those who just want to take, but don't really have much else to offer. The second reason is to develop a stronger sense of roots and cultural heritage, heritage, and pride in where we come from. And this piece is called Larice Dijonais Doe, and her name is really Loris. And so that should say everything it needs to say about the work. And she's right now on Ancestry.com trying to find her Scottish ancestry. And has made her hair blonde. And this was a part of grew out of experiences that I've had teaching young girls and just seeing this confusion within them about where their value should be, and therefore doing all these things to augment how they look in order to be more valued. And to preserve and save for future generations the richness of our heritage and culture. This piece is called Becoming Again, and it was a plant and trash a plant and trash bed that I created. We call it plant and trash. So trash is something you throw away and you don't value. But had you not had that plant and leaf, then you'd be lying down on 2 pieces of very thin cotton. And so I wanted to showcase the plant and trash so that it is the star of this piece. Originally did it, if you look on the image, you see that band across the leg, a little metal band on one of the legs. That is the first height that it was. I actually delivered it to the gallery, looked at it and said, no. Took it back home and had one night to get it taller and to create this altar-like sculpture, which is what I wanted to do because I want to honor those things from our past and explain, bring the value of them back into other people's minds. Because it simply is the truth. And that is how we should be living our lives in these times. There's no space for half-truths and prettying things up. It is simply the truth. There was slavery in the Cayman Islands, and that is how the majority of us of color got to be here, especially if you're here for generations. This piece is called How We Pray, and it was a batik technique that I was using on the canvas. Important note, for the purpose of this discussion, we've had to start at the point of slavery, as that is how the African influence in Cayman culture has come to be. However, it is crucial to be reminded that the history of our people goes back to the beginning of existence, to a people who were building skyscrapers long before New York and Dubai, to a people who were using advanced medicines and actually saving lives, to a more civilized time, great African civilizations like Kemet, Kush, Napata, Ethiopia, the Davidians, and many more. So we tend to talk about the history of Africa and just start at slavery. And for the purpose of this discussion, that's how those things came to be here. But we must remember that there were amazing civilizations way before the time of slavery. First word is Buckra. I actually have heard this said as I was a child, some of these words, and I'm going to be looking a lot at language. It just so happens that that is what I've come across quite a bit. Does anybody in here actually know what Buckra means? Except Sarah. All right. Buckra, meaning white people, white man, boss, right? And it is an Igbo word. The words are shared between different ethnic groups. So the ethnic group of Southern Nigeria, it is also a word in Suriname. And they all mean basically the same thing: white people, white man, boss. I have heard this word used here in Cayman, and I've seen it all over records in the archive. And so it is definitely something that we have gotten from that African history. And in Cayman, it came to be to describe poor white people. So most of the phrases that I have seen in the archive always references like them old Buckras or them poor Buckras. So it wasn't, I think, as it passed down, things do change connotation. And that's what the word was used for at that time. Bobo. You don't have to be a West Bear to say Bobo. But now that I've been living there for 6 years, I have special privilege to use it. And does anyone know of this one, like the actual, what does Bobo mean to you? Because we use it all the time, but what is it? Friend or brother? You never ever say it to a girl. So it's definitely male. And Bobo is a Ghanaian name, meaning born on a Tuesday. And so it's a name for boys. We always use it to reference boys. Now we say, yeah, Bobo, what's going on? Because I've actually had a student say that to me as a teacher. Look here, Bobo. Technically, I'm a TD, but when I started to think about what started me thinking about this thing is how did that come to be? Why do we always call boys Bobo? And so I started to do the search, and I actually had a friend at NYU who her name is Efua. And for many years we called her Efwa, and she didn't correct us. And we used to tease her because in Cayman we say Efwa. And so we thought we teasing her about that. But most of the names in Ghana have that meaning of the day you were born. And so this one is born on a Tuesday. And you see I put here that the counterpart is TD, but I'm still sort of on the hunt of understanding where TD came from. So far, I think it might have come from tia, like a Spanish word for auntie. And because that's how it's used for an aunt, a sister, a girl who's a friend. Nyam. Now, I have to say that my family didn't use this very much, but I know that this is a word that I have heard Caymanians use and, going to Nyam. It was something I thought, and it sound as if there's the action of Nyamming doesn't sound like it's pretty. It's not a tea party, right? And so Nyam tater was always the word that Gullah Negro called sweet potatoes. But why did he say Nyam for eat? Sweet potatoes, which he called Nyam or Yam teter, was his chief eating, given to him as his allowance, his main standby, and hence come to signify eating itself. I have found this word is quite popular, and it is it's in many different African dialects and languages. So I just listed the Wolof, Nyam meaning food to eat, and fula, Nyama meaning to eat. And so now a lot of the times we have things here that are more, I think, used in Jamaica, but we have adopted them. I'm so happy we got Aki. And so while I don't recall my family saying that word very often, I know that I heard it around my neighborhood quite a bit. And so that's one of the words that I came across. This was the reference. I'm not going to read through all that, but just in case anybody ever wants to have a copy, there's more references in here to Nyam and what it meant in the different languages. But it's all about food or eating food. Kamya. Kamya is not an African word. It's not from an African word. The English word ya may have come from come here, right? Mm-hmm. And then shortened. So then it becomes kamya. So I started looking at words like that. Does it have an English word that it came from that then we creolized and it was different? But that's not what happened with Ana, because Ana means, it means you people, right? It's plural, it's the group of you. And that doesn't sound like any English word to describe a group that I've ever heard. And that is where I really started earnestly searching to find out. And the original word is wana. And I discovered it through the Igbo language of the Gullah people, which I learned about them at Howard, and I actually met somebody who's a Gullah. And I heard him talking one day as I was walking by, and he said, something, ahana. And I was listening to this, I was like, is this person Caymanian, Bahamian, and Jamaican all at the same time? Right? It sounded so much like us, and I just started talking to them. And that is where I learned the first about the Gullah people and their history. For those of you who don't know, they were in the Sea Islands off of South Carolina. And because they were they're isolated on these small islands, they didn't mix as much. So they were put out there to work on cotton, and they would dye cotton. I don't know if you've ever heard of a geechee person, but that's another word to describe them. So they would dye the cotton, mostly a lavender color, I don't know why. And so even when they were freed, everybody knew they had been a slave in that area because their hands were stained purple almost permanently. And so they share a lot with us. And certainly it's the way that they speak. I remember as a child hearing people here, and my grandmother in Jamaica, my grandfather would say, "Where is Nasaria?" And my grandmother would say, "I'm outside." And I would I'm a girl. What are you talking about? And one of the things that my friend told me is that in the Igbo language and in their Creole language, he doesn't have feminine or masculine connotation. It is just the person that you're asking about is elsewhere. So sometimes it's pronounced as a hana, as I said. In Jamaica, it's uno, and in Cayman, it's ane or ana, depending on if you're from Northside or Georgetown. It was amazing teaching and being able to pick up. Like, I can tell the kids what district they're from in a second. And it took me a little while with Northside, because I feel like Northside has it's a very subtle difference that they have in who they are as a character, a district character. But I finally got to that. West Wales, I think, are the strongest, and Georgetown are very close seconds. You know a Georgetowner when you hear one, or a West Wales. So I gave this up already, you people, all of you through. So this one, Cotta. I don't know if anybody has had to suffer through the combing out of knotted hair. Now let me set the scene. Mine was down to my knees. And it was that, Diana Ross, like big whoosh that she had. And so my mother clearing that out. And if by the time she cleared out one, the other one was knotted again and then back and forth. So she would take it and twist it around and wrap it up. So, but a cotta. But the first, looking for this word, I came across it in Jamaica as kata, right? I just came across that. And then when I looked to see what a kata was, it's a piece of cloth in Jamaica that is wrapped and rolled like a cinnamon bun to place on your head to carry the basket.
Yeah.
See, my auntie is agreeing because maybe you did this at some point in your life. In Africa, it would be banana leaf or other foliage or cloth, right? And the circle of cloth women wore as cushions to balance baskets on their heads. And here's a cotta from Cayman. Now, and I must call this young lady's name, Ariane White. She allowed her mother to do that for me so I could get the picture. And normally my mom would just twist my hair. So it wouldn't be 2 strands twisted, it'd be 1 piece twisted. But that is an example of a cotta. And I remember when I made that connection, that it was just awesome to me because you're talking about in Africa, it's a ring and it's called cotta there, coming to Jamaica, becoming kata, and now coming to Cayman and becoming your hair that's wrapped on your head. And it was the first time I think that I said, yes, I am finding now the links that I've been looking for. Because when I was younger, when I went to Howard, I didn't know like I didn't feel like I fit completely in because everybody else seemed to have this great sense of who they were. And then here I was like, loving Ribena. And so I always knew that there was more character to who we are. It was just that because in Cayman, we don't talk about this is your culture. It's just, we think of it as this is just what we do. And so therefore we've lost some of those connections. And so I made a giant sugar head cotta. And I really enjoyed this project because I took crocus sack, which is what sugar came in. So that was quite a connection there. And a sugar head is somebody with like brown sugar colored hair, which is Afro hair. So mostly West Bay. That's all I'm saying. And so I remember hearing about sugar head and I really wanted to do that. I made this giant bobby pin and everything because I want my work to be able to start those conversations. And so when somebody says to me, what is that? Somebody asked me if it was a poop emoji. I was most annoyed. But you start these conversations and then you're able to share and you teach your own people at the same time. You're teaching new people that this is the type of history that we have. This one, my mom wanted me to leave out. But it is what it is. So we say kaka, and in Afrikaans, it's kak. And that word means what I have put right there. And so, if you need to go kaka, you need to go do number 2. Crawl is another word that is comes from Afrikaans. Word for traditional African village. The thing to understand about that, the crawl for us, for those of you who don't know, is where we would take the turtles. So they would build this big sort of, it's an enclosement in the sea. So these big poles that go into the water, and then you can put the turtle in and leave them there because when you went away to go turtling, you're out there on a little key. And you just have a little boat. The big ship would drop you off and you're out there turtling, but they wouldn't come back. Sometimes you'd be there for a month or more. And so therefore they had to keep them alive. If they killed them immediately, they would rot before they got them on the ship. And while Afrikaans is definitely is a language based on the Dutch language, when you start to ask the questions how they came here, it came through the slave trade. Okra is another one. The original Igbo word is I can't say it. Okwuru. And that's as close as I can get to it. It may not be the correct pronunciation. And going back to the crawl, the word was used to describe driving livestock into an enclosure. So it's also an action. And in my poem, you heard me say, you can't crawl my spirit, meaning you cannot enclose my spirit, right? He crawls his sheep every evening. This is one of my favorite ones, Duppy. It's of North African origin, meaning ghost or spirit. And you can see the references there. And it definitely, this tradition in these stories in the Caribbean, and it's everywhere that slavery was, there's a Duppy tradition. And that's even in North Carolina is where, North Carolina and New Orleans, I think I have found in Louisiana, some evidence of these, using that word, not ghost, not spirit, but Duppy, right? All right, Wattle and Daub. In Africa, it is common in the architecture of traditional houses, such as those of the Ashanti people. Its usage dates back at least 6,000 years. Lathe and plaster and cob techniques thought to have developed from Wattle and Daub. Now these houses, we always say it, they lasted, they hold up so much more in storms, right? And I would think that people who were living in coastal areas elsewhere, they knew what they were doing in terms of what do we have to do to survive. And this tradition, it's not to say that it's only in Africa, because we've seen them in other places, but we can, when we look at those places, we can trace it right back to Africa and the Ashanti people. This piece of work, The Women Have Become the Truth, is one of my favorite pieces. And I created it after the peace and watching the Peace and Reconciliation hearings of after apartheid had been abolished. And what I was watching these court cases where woman after woman came in to speak for the people she had lost, for what she had witnessed. And there were even children who were brought in who could not speak for themselves because the trauma they had been through, they had lost the ability to even verbalize anymore. And I did this piece, and my dream was that one of these days I would get to show it to Mandela, but hopefully in spirit he's seeing it. And this piece is done in diaper cloth. Oh, that's another word I need to research. Diaper is the cloth that you use to make like a nappy, or what you now know as a pamper, right? And I wanted to do that on cloth because there was a healing that needed to happen, and still hasn't happened, I think, after apartheid. And so it was my way of offering something that was soothing while the truth was staring at us so strongly. And when I watched those hearings, I felt as if I was one of those women. It's almost as if I could feel everything through their words. And that is probably the first time that I put myself in some of my work like that. Mancala and Wari. This is a game that is played here, which is also African. The reason for it being played may be a little bit different. I know traditionally played at a house of mourning. It was believed that upon completion of the game of Wari, the spirit of the dead person would have gone on to his or her place of calling. And so Miss Twyla May Vargas is who taught me about that history, and that in Cayman, that was how it was for a time. It was played when somebody passed, but now we play it as competition and just for fun. But it's quite interesting because it ties to a nika. The seeds that were used were nika seeds, and I don't know if you all know what a nika seed is, but I don't. Along the road, if you see a cockspur vine, it's called lion bush in Africa because it's used to keep lions out of the encampment. Put it all around, and there's a prickly pod in there. These three little beads inside. And if you rub them on cement, yes, Frankie just did it, and you burn each other. That was a game we played. Our games were not so nice, apparently. Those nikas are used in this game as well, and are only indigenous butterfly can only lay its eggs on that bush. So once again, I'm just showing you like all these links and how everything comes together. It's a circle that is absolutely beautiful for me to see how one thing relied on the other, because we didn't have nicas here at first. They came here over time, whether it was by sea or through the slavery. We just have an image here of Ray Biker and D.L. Ebanks. I had to make that reference because if I don't, Ray will actually probably sue me. So, slave walls, and this is credited to National Trust, are stone walls which are said to have been built by hand by African slaves who worked in Cayman over a century ago. There are many scattered across the 3 islands, with one of the most well-known ones being Drummond's Wall in Bodden Town. The construction of these walls are so solid, most of them have withstood the test of time and the elements without any mortar or cement, just perfectly dry stacked stones reaching heights of up to 7 feet. Now, I've seen them myself, but I've not seen the ones that are that tall. And I must tell you that a lot of them, we went to look for some maybe last year sometime, and they're still standing quite strongly. There is some pieces that are falling off. Now I'm sure that had to, but I mean, they stood up through Ivan. So it's really a testament to the way that they were made. Emancipation of slaves in Cayman Islands took place in 1835. So some of the walls would have been constructed before that date. Stone walls were also built by early settlers and Caymanians before and after emancipation. As a time-tested piece of history, one can only imagine the many hours of manual labor that went into the construction of these walls. The wall featured in the photo you're about to see is located in a previously undisturbed forest in North Side and is still in good condition despite its age. Some reports suggest that Drummond's Wall was built for protection against invaders, whereas some of the other walls seem to have been built to demarcate boundary lines between properties. And that is the image of that wall. And when we saw some, there were some on the ground, so we picked one up. And I'm just, for me, the artist ever, I guess, thinking about all those hands that held them before to chip them or to place them perfectly, and here I am and I'm touching it. I often think about the footsteps of people who have been on certain property that, for instance, if it's a piece of raw land that has not had us walking around it a lot, you think, what what were they thinking? What were they saying? These things keep me up at night. Jonkanoo in the Caribbean. Now, I had always heard of Jonkanoo in the Caribbean, but not so much in Cayman until I was working at the museum. And my mom also told me that she had experienced Jonkanoo. So Jonkanoo originally started off, came to the Caribbean from Africa. And it was a celebration around Christmas when the enslaved Africans were given a couple of days to celebrate, and they would do it in their way. So they would choose a queen and dress her from head to foot in a large, scary mask and colorful costume. Jonkanoo was not a pleasant experience. It was to scare people. While they were all dressed, the tribes of Jonkanoo's danced, sang, and paraded through the streets. They demanded refreshments from each house they visited. Now, I don't know if anything is ringing familiar for you in our history and culture, because this became something else in Cayman, just that we don't realize that that's where it's coming from. So Jonkanoo in Cayman, as in Jamaica, Cayman's first costume parade began before emancipation. Here, the people marched with puppets like an old man, a wooden figure on a horse, and other costumed characters. They were rewarded small gifts of bread kind, fruits, hats, clothing, and sweets. So now what it became is at Christmas time and on New Year's, the group marched and danced, made music and drums, maracas, graters, kerosene cans and sticks and bottles. Large crowds often gathered and joined in the parade. And my mom told me that they would have this little dolly, like a nice little dolly, and they would offer it to a child they'd give it to you and then take it away when your parents aren't. So they would ask your parents to buy it for you or to give them something, and then they would snatch it away and move it on to another house. She recalls most people hiding, kids hiding from that. The main character in a Jonkanoo parade was a life-size stuffed doll. The doll looked like an old man with a mustache placed on a horse. He would shake and bow to people as he passed by. A child-sized wooden puppet made with hinge joints was dressed in old clothes and set upon a horse. The puppet's head, arms, and legs moved in a lifelike manner. Some children were afraid of the characters and often ran and hid until they were gone. What that became in Cayman, if anybody here remembers, the marchers. So at Christmas, a group of men, specifically in Georgetown, it might have happened elsewhere, they would go from house to house with their guitars playing and singing, but you had to reward them. So sometimes it would be with rum, it would be with food as well, and they would all go to Matilda Corner, which is out by the fisher, where the fishermen are in the middle of town. They would go to that area and they would spend the rest of the night and the morning there cooking and drinking and playing music and carousing until Christmas Day. So that's a part of our tradition. I'll tell you who was a marcher was Mr. Rennie Barnes was one of the marchers. And then also, why am I forgetting his name? The gentleman, Wesley's daddy. That's Mr.
Howell.
Yes. And then also Miss, let me see if I can't remember her name, but there's a lawyer here and her daddy was, and Mr. Godfrey. You mean like Niels and, yeah. So it wasn't as, costumed and as scary, but it still had that same sort of feeling when they were coming around because you had to pay them. So this piece called Carnival Duppy, inspired by that thought, but then my work normally takes now another direction. It's not just specifically speaking about Jonkanoo at all, but it's became for me in the process about the women, specifically for me, the women who have mental issues, who we see on our roads, who we pass every day. And sometimes people use them for joke, but do we really see them? And do we really understand what's going on with them? Or are they just for our entertainment? And so that's why this piece is called Carnival Duppy. Obeah, my mother wanted me to leave this one out too, is system of spiritual healing and justice, making practices, something went wrong there, developed among enslaved West Africans in the West Indies based on the tenets of original African religion. And this is important to say because we've been taught like, oh yeah, it's such a bad thing. It's, it's this really bad thing. It's just somebody else's system of spirituality and of serving the God as they understand, right? It is illegal in Cayman. I think it still is. I remember Easter maybe 10 years ago, somebody was actually arrested at Smith Cove, thought to be practicing Obeah. And Hearst's notes on the history of the Cayman Islands include several cases of enslaved Africans accused of practicing Obeah, one of them being Primus. That date was September 23rd, 1816. If you ever get a hold of that book and read through it, it's amazing. There are lots of stories in there about enslaved Africans and court cases, right? Obeah Stories here. So we're going to talk about some of the evidence of it here now. I remember as a child, whenever we went to East End, we heard this one, you have to be careful for this person because she cuts out children's hearts. And I didn't realize that, I won't call her name because she has descendants who are still alive, but there were two women in particular. And there are legit stories of a child who was found dead by the sea and, children being taken away in the night and having to escape. I don't know how much of that is Obeah and how much of that is, some really bad person trying to do something. I thought about all the things I've heard about. I mean, the things you hear as a child, it's scary. And I've heard people talking about putting names of people in water and freezing it to stop them from doing you harm. So these are now what I consider superstitions. And these are things that have come down from lessons learned through stories and oral history and those type of things mixed into a system of religion. Walk into your house backwards to stop the duppy from following you. Anyone heard that one before? Sweep away people's footprints to prevent someone you don't like from returning to your yard. Don't sweep your foot or you will never get married. That's a lie. Season rice to keep a man or a woman. For those of you who don't understand that one, it is all the men said yeah. So basically it's taking a used garment and washing it in water and using that water to cook in order to keep that man tied to you. That's all I'm going to say about that. If someone comes to your house and you want them to leave, turn the broom upside down in the corner with salt on it. And that was definitely in Downside Up, Frank McField's play. And this one I just put duppy matches sulfur because I want to tell you the story itself. So if you're walking and you feel a presence, you're in East End, this is the East End story. You had to carry matches with you. You were told you should always walk with matches. And so if you feel this presence and it's following you, you drop matches on the ground one by one as you go. But when you get to your house, you light one. The belief is that the duppy will stop and pick up all the matches, which slows them down somehow. But when you get to your house and you light the match, the smell of the sulfur will keep them from following you in the house. Devon looks very confused. So some of these things, I mean, I feel like a lot of them, they've been changed over time and those type of things, but their origins are in a system of belief. And that is really, to me, it's all it is. And this was my image, Obeah Woman, 2009. Long Celia. I know that a lot of us have heard about her. I know a lot of us have not heard about her, and that her story is still something that needs to be told. And I want to say this right now, but I think she should be a national hero. And let's see what happens in time to come there. I'm not the only one agitating for that. Long Celia, an enslaved African woman who went to trial in 1820 for inciting rebellion after hearing that slaves were to be freed, and for asking Sarah Harborne about it. Harborne, being afraid to lose her free labor, accused Long Celia of threatening to send men with machetes to cut their throats. Sorry. Testified against her, and upon facing a 12 white man jury, Long Celia was found guilty and stripped naked and given 50 lashes publicly in Georgetown. Now, Long Celia is that story about her. This is about all that you will read in her. And I think Frank and Steve McField have done some further research and have, they said that after she was given the lashes, that a law was passed that no women were allowed to be beat anymore, lashed in that way. Nobody is really sure if the law happened because of her case, and probably not very likely that she garnered that kind of attention, but that in her speaking about freedom, so she heard from a man on a ship from Jamaica that Jamaican enslaved Africans had been given their freedom in Jamaica, but the slave owners here in Cayman didn't want to they didn't know how to do without their labor, because they didn't know how to handle the land and do those things for themselves. So they kept on not telling them about it. And so when she heard the truth, she asked Sarah about it. And she said that every time we come into the room, we hear you all talking about our freedom papers. And then when I walk into the room, you suddenly go quiet. And so Sarah here, as far as we can understand, Sarah wanted to accused her of sending men with machetes because she wanted to shut her up. And so she faced this jury that she didn't have a chance of being set free. And then she was publicly punished. But still, then slavery had to be abolished because now it became public and more people started to agitate and ask questions about it. So it had to be abolished. I think an interesting note to share is that a lot of our industries here and a lot of big family businesses and stuff are actually based on the reparations that former slave owners were given to compensate for them losing their free labor. And so the descendants or the enslaved Africans were not given anything, but the slave owners were. And that is what we started our shipping industry with. That is what we started our banks with. So it's important to know that, because sometimes people will say, why can't these people do any better? It's generations after generations. You think about the generational wealth that you don't have, and that might answer some of the questions, along with the traumas that they've been through because of extreme poverty. And this is my painting entitled Long Celia, attempting to show a woman a woman who might be an enslaved African, but burned in her back is not the lashes, but it is the power of another woman in Africa that is her ancestor. You can see the image is burned into her back. And so it takes us back, not just to slavery, but to further back to the strength of those women. Okay, so I know I went really fast. How are we doing for time?
So we can do about 10 minutes Q&A and then wrap up.
Okay. Any questions or comments, or we want to talk about anything? Yes.
I just want to make a comment about Jonkanoo because I never put it together before. But I'm Nigerian, and when I was a kid, in my grandmother's village, we had something like you just described, but they were called to, and they would come to the house. And I remember with my siblings hiding under the beds because they come with whips and canes, and you have to pay them. Otherwise, they don't leave your house. And so with my sisters, we were under the mattress, just screaming, waiting for them to leave. So it's so interesting that you have that.
Yeah.
That explains that.
Yeah. That's amazing. Carrie?
Yes, I was wondering, do we have any information about who the descendants of Long Celia might be?
So you just put into the air the work that I really, really want to do. Frank and Steve McFeel have said, or either one of the two, have said that she left with a family to live elsewhere. And they did name a couple of Eastern Caribbean islands that might be possible that she had traveled to. And I think what it'll take is the research in their archives to see if they kept better records than we did about people arriving around that time. And the fact that she's called Long Celia, I don't think that was her name. I think she was very tall, and therefore you were named what you looked like. And so it might be easier than we think to sort of locate her. I'm interested in knowing who her descendants are. Do they even know that she's a part of our history? And is there any trace of her still here? So I'm even wishing that we could do DNA, that we could find her descendants and then see if there's a trait here. Quite a bit of work to do, but we don't know right now where I'm trying to think of the islands that they mentioned, but I don't remember right now. But she left with a family. When the enslaved Africans were freed, then they just started to work for pay for some of the people that were their former owners.
We have a question from Zoom. Makana, you want to go ahead?
Yes, hi. I'm not too certain if Nasaria can hear me, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for your presentation. So I'm a Caymanian. I am in graduate school. I'm currently in the US. And I really want to maybe think about why, or maybe if, do you think that Caymanians are more receptive to an African connection in recent times? And if so, what would you maybe attribute that to? So, I mean, years ago, I had locks in my hair, and I got sort of questioned about my appearance. And I know that there is still a strong sort of anti-Blackness maybe, but I feel that the younger generation is maybe a little bit more open to hearing the sort of connections that we as Caymanians have, not just right to the European part of ourselves, but also to this African connection. So I know that was a long question, but I just wanted to say, do you think that we're more receptive? And if so, why maybe? Thank you for your presentation as well.
It depends on what part of society you're talking about. The men who left Cayman and went away to sea traveled all over the place. They were in Egypt, they were in Africa. They saw much more of that than we did, and had a different sort of, I guess, perspective of what Africa means and what being African means, and what that looks like. But I think if I generalize, I would say, yes, it has gotten better. People are more receptive, mostly because of American television, British television, music. The younger generations are being exposed to more things, and it's being presented as the norm. This is normal, and these conversations are normal. So we find that I noticed it recently, a lot of young girls letting their hair go natural, and which I think is amazing. And I remember when I was teaching, getting in trouble because I stood up for the kids who they kept on saying they had to cut their hair. So if you had an afro, which grows up, you had to cut that. But if you had straighter hair, which hung down, this is for boys, then they forced them to cut their hair, the ones with the afro, to cut their hair really low. And I remember speaking, I'm like, what's the difference, right? Apparently I've always been that child, because it's either black or white, not into the gray. But as time has gone on, when I have these conversations now, I'll say what has changed is that I will find that more people will stop and think, more people will ask questions, but it does by no means mean that the negative connotations of being of African descent in Cayman, that they have been eradicated, because all of that still exists. And that includes going into job interviews with a strike against you. Worse if you got Caymanian accent, those type of things. So it's those things that we need to look at. Not really so concerned about what's in somebody's heart. That's for them to sort out. But what I'm concerned about is equal opportunities for everybody, and that everybody has a chance to be able to get some, eat too, is what I'm saying. And then we can work. It's not to say we cannot work on how we look at people with our hearts and our souls, because that absolutely is important. Any more?
I find it interesting that the young lady asked that question, because I think one of the answers to what she's asking is, when we as Caymanians go away to school, your eyes really open up. Because I can remember it happening to me, because I went straight from here to Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
And I got involved in a Caribbean group, and then there was all these, Afro-American organizations and stuff. And then when you sit down in the group and you start listening, and then you reflect back to how you didn't experience any of that here in Cayman, you start to understand, well, who am I? And then you start to understand who exactly you are in terms of the whole world scene.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one way that it has been changing, because you have more people going out to school and experiencing this, and you come back and you share it, and then you start to relate now your own experience to experiences.
What college did for me was teach me to be able to recognize the subtleties. So while it was not straight in your face, I remember going to this girl, she's an English girl. We met in school, we were like besties, and she's like, oh, come over to my house. And I came, and her mom put her in her room and left me in the living room with the dog the entire 3 hours. And then my mom came to pick me up and she's like, why do you look like that? And I was like, well, I wasn't allowed to, like, I just sat in the living room with the dog. Now my mother immediately got upset because she knew what it was. But I didn't know how to interpret those things because in my neighborhood, and I'm gonna tell you this, and Shari knows it, I didn't think I looked any different than Shari. Because my cousin right there, my perspective is like, you were either white or black, and I was obviously not white, so I was black. And so in our neighborhoods, like we were just like, in our neighborhood, we were Breezy Castle people. It wasn't, we weren't getting those experiences. But I know the older people were. I remember that Randy's father went through a lot because of the color of his skin. And so we were just protected from those. But the subtleties is what you have to learn to recognize, because if you don't, then you're thinking everything is okay and you're not realizing that something might be getting you in the door, but somebody else is blocked. And we have to fight for everybody. Yes.
First, just want to say thank you for the presentation. I was very intrigued with it because over the years, my family and I are very into genealogy and trying to figure out where we're coming from, who we belong to. Our side, Ethel and myself are cousins, and so our family always shared stories through Cayman history. But on my father's side, it's almost a mystery to us because a lot of our family is from Jamaica who went to US, UK, and I think it was Japan, and then they came from Africa first. And I ended up doing a genealogy, an ancestry test, which I kind of laughed when you showed me Larice. I was like, oh, well, that's me again. And looking for my Scottish ancestors, literally, because I was told that I was only Scottish, Irish, and Jamaican.
Right.
And then when I took the ancestry test, it opened my eyes to how many different countries that we as Caymanians come from. I mean, I could list a few if you like, just to give you an idea, because I thought I was only from those three, whereas I'm from Nigeria, Northwestern Europe, Cameroon, Congo, and Western Bantu people, Norway, Ireland, Wales, Benin and Togo, Ivory Coast and Ghana, Scotland, European Jewish, Indigenous Americas, Yucatan Peninsula, Northern African, Eastern Bantu people, and I'm also from the additional communities from the Afro-Caribbean people of Belize, Honduras, and Nicaragua, and the South Central Afro-Jamaica.
Let me just say you are blessed. Yeah, I think the DNA tests are amazing for pulling up some stuff, and actually a lot of people are mentioning finding so much Jewish connections here in people in Cayman. I wouldn't be surprised if it says a European Jew, that's different. But I know that Phoenicians are original Hebrew. Look into the expert over here on this stuff. Jewish, coming from Ethiopia and Africa. Any more questions? Good then? Okay. Yes, one more.
Oh, one more.
She actually lived in Africa.
Yeah,
so
I just wanted to mention that briefly. I'm really grateful for the opportunity that I had through United World College. I was selected after going to John Gray to go to school in Swaziland. And of course, when I was selected, people are like, oh, you're gonna go all the way to Africa. And I was like, yep. And honestly, I felt way more at home in Swaziland than when I went to Florida after. And, listening to your presentation and all of the connections and stuff. And I remember learning when I was there, stuff like Anna, meaning you all in from West Africa, and so much of those connections, because just the culture there and the way people were and how welcoming everyone was in Swaziland just really did feel a lot like Cayman. And basically the school that I went to, Waterford Kampala, was actually formed as a resistance to apartheid in South Africa, and Nelson Mandela's children and grandchildren actually went to that school. So it was a really amazing opportunity to be able to go there, and several other Canadians have been able to go to that college as well. Ms. Pedley is also a great supporter, and her late husband was a great supporter of United World College. So these are just amazing opportunities that we're really lucky to have in Cayman. And just to be part of that story is just such a blessing. And the funny thing that you mentioned about like the Caribbean Association when you went to college. So when I went to Florida State, of course I joined the Caribbean Student Association, and they looked at me like, why are you here? And I found out that I was actually the only one there that was actually from the Caribbean, like born in the Caribbean and from the Caribbean, because everyone else was like, yeah, my grandmother's from Jamaica. So it was just very interesting. I ended up with some friends from the Caribbean Association, but it's an interesting experience, especially going to the US. And then the other thing from my African friends from the Swazi school, basically the interesting experience they have going to the US is that everyone wants them to be they have to be called African Americans. They're like, no, I'm just African. And it's like, no, you're African American. And no, I'm African. Like, I'm actually African. And they're like, huh?
There's so much more for us to sort of delve into. I started to look at foods, and I had to give up on that because it's kind of hard to prove where those rundown comes from in that way, because from the beginning of time, people have been cooking in one pot. It was convenient, but certainly some of the stews and some of the techniques that we use, like there's Jonkanoo in Jamaica, which I think is called duckna here, but I need to, and it's when you wrap the food in a banana leaf. And duckna is used for something else here I'm not allowed to mention. But thank you all so much. Before I'm going to do a performance of the Long Celia poem. I think this is like my life's work is Long Celia. She inspires everything, and it was because it was one of those first times that I actually had proof. I actually said, this here proves, it's written in a book, and proves that existence, that influence on our culture. And it says a lot about our women as well, and that spirit. It's something we can draw on. So I'm going to do Long Celia for you. And my husband, Randy Gillette, will be drumming.
Randy, come forward some more. Yeah.
Echo, it was Long Celia, they call me, not Ntizaki or Mama Zulu or even Nanny, just Long Celia. Just Long Celia longing for freedom. Just Long Celia hoping for home. Just Long Celia free. On a hair them drums. These are very sweet, them words was just like to bite in and let them run sticky down my chin. Free, free, free. On a hair them drums. My Sunday offering, this my Boxing Day dinner, this the candle wood that it's in the wind that's fiddling through the wattle where the daub has worn away. It's running mad like ants across the table where heavy cakes has just been cut. It's spilling out of hushed lips like drunken men pouring another cup of sea grape wine. Start a revolution. Take a puff and pass it around. Take a puff and pass it around. On a air, then drums. You can't crawl my spirit, but for a little time. I feel the light you cannot see, and I will swim back home to lay my clutch where I began to You a gap seeding duppy. You a blackyarding telltale dead woman. You lie, and 12 white goats are picking over my pickings in 50 lashes. I, a woman, I a free woman, I a naked woman, I a torn and tattered woman, but you still can't break open my cockspur thorny shell. And remember what happened when you rub a nipper wrong. Wake up. You still tied to that dock, one knot away from walking on water. You still taking the lashes from that raging monster whose rib you took. You still fighting the reflection you see in your basin. That is me. Wake up. Lick them drums, Randy. Lick them drums. May want to speak as well. I just want to say thank you, and I wanted to acknowledge a couple people. My dad is here, and my aunt, Auntie Belle, and then my aunt Rhonda. I'm trying not to leave people out, but I'm going to the elders here. My friends over here, Heather and Caroline. Thank you all. My students who are here, family and friends, and all the new people. Thanks for your support.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. So as we wrap up this evening, just a few words of thanks. First, we want to acknowledge Randy and Abigail and who've been assisting in the presentation. Thank you all very much. We originally had this particular event booked in our clubhouse, but the response was so overwhelming, we had to look at moving it at short notice. We reached out to Dr. Ben in the back at St. Matthew's University, and it said absolutely. So special thanks to St. Matthew's University. Thank you so much. I want to say much love to the National Trust team and all of their work putting it together. They're over here in the corner. So we've got Kathy, we've got Stuart, we've got Laura. Nicole isn't here with us, but she was frantically making sure we got everybody here and all processed. And of course, we have an intern, her first week in. Carolina, thank you so much. As I said, this is the first of many to come. So please speak with the ladies at the front desk and learn more about the upcoming series. The next one is with one of our expert volunteers, Mr. Lonnie Coots. You know, he's made me look at bugs in a whole new way beyond shoes and a box spray can. So he's going to be doing a very special session. It's called Butterflies, Bugs, and Butterflies, Beetles, and Bugs. Oh my. So you don't want to miss that. And that's tied to the insect collection that we have at the National Trust. Can you believe that? We have a fantastic collection of the insects right here from the Cayman Islands. But let's end this session by saying thanks to everybody who's joined us on Zoom. But most importantly, let us end this session by acknowledging and saying a very special thank you to our guest speaker. When we talked about the date to do this, we were going to push it back, and then she said, wait a minute, it's Black History Month. And it is very fitting that we started off in February. So as I said, royalty and an awesome culture keeper. Help me thank our guest speaker, Nasaria Suckoo.